Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering you own an entire tropical island. It sounds like winning the lottery until you realize nobody is bringing you electricity. Nobody is delivering fresh water. Nobody is paying your employees. Nobody is repairing your docks. Nobody is filling your luxury villas with guests. That's your job now, because owning a private island isn't about escaping the world. It's about building one, and that world costs millions of dollars every year to keep alive. Here's the part nobody shows you in the drone footage. That aerial shot, turquoise water, white sand, a single thatched roof villa sitting alone on the shoreline, took a helicopter, a licensed pilot, and usually a marketing budget bigger than most people's annual salary just to film. Everything after that shot is the real story. So let's actually build this thing, honestly, with the good and the bad both on the table, because an island can be one of the smartest assets a wealthy family ever buys. And it can also be one of the fastest ways to quietly bleed 7 figures a year. Both of those things are true. It just depends entirely on how you run it. First, the two doors you can walk through. Door 1. You buy the island outright, land and all, and it becomes purely yours. No guests unless you invite them, no business plan required, nothing but the raw cost of existing in paradise. This is the Necker Island model before it became a business. Pure personal asset, pure personal expense. Door 2. You buy the island, but you build it specifically to rent it out. To guests, to celebrities throwing a wedding, to a film crew shooting a commercial, to anyone willing to pay tens of thousands of dollars a night for total privacy. This is the island as a hospitality business, dressed up to look like a private paradise. Different door, completely different set of numbers, and completely different risks. Most people buying an island today walk through door 2, even if they tell themselves they're walking through door 1. Because pure personal paradise, it turns out, is one of the most expensive hobbies on the planet. And almost nobody can absorb that cost without eventually needing the island to pay for itself. Let's start with the number that ends most people's island dream before it even begins. The purchase price. A small, undeveloped island, a few dozen acres, no infrastructure, nothing but rock, sand, and jungle can sell for a few $100,000 in the right location. Sometimes even less in remote parts of the world nobody's discovered yet. That's the number that gets people excited. That's the number in the listing. But a genuinely private, developable island with real freshwater access, protection from the worst storm paths, and legal clarity on ownership, the kind wealthy buyers actually want, commonly runs anywhere from $5 million to $50 million, and private islands with existing luxury infrastructure already built can sell for well over $100 million. And that's before you've spent a single dollar making it livable. Pause here, because this is the part almost nobody budgets for. An island isn't land with a shortcut around the cost of a house. It's land with every single utility a normal house takes for granted completely. Totally absent, and you're the one who has to invent all of them from scratch. Start with power. There's no grid out there, no wires running from a utility company, no meter on the side of a building. Most private islands run on diesel generators, sometimes multiple redundant units in case one fails, and fuel has to be shipped in by boat, often at a premium far above what the same fuel costs on the mainland. A mid-sized private island can burn through $200,000 to over $1 million a year just on generator fuel and maintenance, depending on how much air conditioning, lighting, and refrigeration the island actually needs to run. Increasingly, owners are investing in solar and battery storage to cut that number down. A serious solar and battery installation can cost $1 to $5 million up front, but it can meaningfully reduce the ongoing fuel bill, sometimes by more than half. Here's the honest trade-off nobody frames clearly enough. It's a large upfront cost in exchange for a real, ongoing savings, and on an island you plan to keep for decades. It's often the smarter financial bet, not just the environmentally friendly one. This is one of the rare places where doing the expensive thing up front quietly becomes the cheap thing over time. Then there's water. Rainfall alone can't reliably supply a villa full of guests taking long showers and a kitchen running at full capacity. Most private islands need a desalination plant, pulling in seawater and stripping the salt out through reverse osmosis, and a system large enough to support a real luxury property can cost $500,000 to $2 million to install, plus ongoing maintenance and the power needed to run it constantly. Waste has to go somewhere too, and somewhere can't be the ocean anymore. Modern private islands need proper septic or treatment systems, both because guests expect it and because environmental regulators increasingly require it, with fines steep enough to make cutting corners a genuinely bad bet. And the environmental obligations don't stop at waste. Many of the most desirable islands sit inside or beside protected marine zones, coral reef systems, or endangered species habitats, which means construction permits alone can take years to clear, and ongoing conservation requirements, reef monitoring, restrictions on dock lighting that disorients sea turtles, limits on how much beachfront can be altered at all, become a permanent part of the operating budget, not a one-time box to check. A dedicated environmental consultant or conservation officer, increasingly common on higher-end islands, can add another $80,000 to $150,000 a year to the payroll. It sounds like an unnecessary cost until the coral reef that draws paying guests in the first place starts visibly dying from an unpermitted dredging project next door. At which point protecting it turns out to have been protecting the entire business model all along. Now here's a cost most people never even think to ask about. How do you actually get to your own island? A dock sturdy enough to handle a real supply boat, not just a rowboat, can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars depending on the depth of the surrounding water and how exposed the shoreline is to weather. Many islands also need a private airstrip or, at minimum, a helipad, because flying guests in directly is often the only realistic way to get them there without a multi-hour boat transfer that ruins the entire fantasy before it starts. A proper grass or gravel airstrip can run into the millions, and that's before the ongoing cost of maintaining it against jungle growth and erosion. Here's the genuinely good news buried in all of this. And it's real. Every one of these systems, once built properly, becomes an asset in its own right. A private island with its own power, water, dock, and airstrip isn't just livable. It's rentable at a price point that a beautiful island with none of that infrastructure simply cannot command. The infrastructure is expensive, but it's also exactly what turns a rock in the ocean into a business. And before any of that infrastructure gets built, there's a layer of cost that has nothing to do with concrete or diesel at all, the paperwork of simply being allowed to own the thing. Most private islands worth buying sit in another country entirely, and many of those countries either restrict foreign land ownership outright or require buying through a local company, a long-term leasehold, or a specific investor visa program built for exactly this kind of purchase. Legal structuring alone, corporate entities, title searches, survey verification, and negotiating exactly what happens to the island if a government changes its foreign ownership rules 5 years from now, commonly costs $50,000 to several $100,000 before a single generator ships. Some jurisdictions require the buyer to keep a percentage of profits in-country or to hire a set percentage of staff locally, regardless of skill availability. Others attach the island to a 99-year lease rather than outright ownership, which sounds like a technicality until you remember that a lease, unlike a deed, has an expiration date your grandchildren may eventually have to negotiate. None of this is disclosed clearly in the glossy listing photos, and it's exactly the kind of due diligence that separates buyers who own an island for 30 peaceful years from buyers who spend the first 3 fighting a legal battle they didn't know they'd signed up for. Now, the people. An island doesn't run itself, and unlike a house on the mainland, you can't just call a plumber and have them show up in 20 minutes. Most private islands run on a resident staff that lives there full-time, whether the owner is present or not, because the moment nobody's watching the generators, the desalination plant, or the dock, small problems become catastrophic ones. A caretaker or estate manager overseeing daily operations commonly earns $80,000 to $150,000 a year, plus housing, because they're living on the island as part of the job. A boat captain, essential for supply runs and guest transfers, adds another $60,000 to $100,000. Groundskeepers, security, a chef if the island hosts guests regularly, housekeeping staff for the villas, A fully staffed private island commonly needs somewhere between 6 and 20 full-time employees depending on its size, and total staffing costs alone can run $500,000 to over $2 million a year. Here's the number that actually surprises people the most. You're paying nearly all of that whether you visit the island twice a year or 12 times. The generators still need running. The dock still needs maintaining. The staff still needs paying. An island doesn't pause itself just because the owner isn't there. It's the rare luxury asset that keeps generating expenses at full speed in your absence. There's a quieter staffing cost too, one that never shows up on a spreadsheet until it does. Turnover. Living full-time on a remote island, away from family, schools, and ordinary town life, is genuinely hard. And even well-paid staff burn out or leave after a year or two, especially in more isolated locations with limited internet or no easy way off the island on a day off. Recruiting and training a replacement caretaker or captain from scratch, often flying candidates in for trial weeks before making an offer, can cost tens of thousands of dollars per hire, once travel and lost productivity during the transition are counted. And a poorly chosen replacement, mismanaging the generators or the dock during their learning curve, can cost far more than the hiring process itself. And then there's the cost of simply existing somewhere remote. Logistics. Every can of food, every roll of toilet paper, every spare part for a generator has to be shipped in, usually by boat, sometimes by plane, and usually at a real premium over mainland prices. Often 20 to 50% more, sometimes far higher for anything urgent or oversized. Supply runs aren't occasional errands. They're a standing weekly or bi-weekly operation with its own fuel cost, its own staff time, and its own risk of something critical simply not arriving on schedule. Added up honestly, before a single guest ever visits, fuel or solar maintenance, water systems, staffing, logistics, insurance, and routine repair against relentless salt air and humidity that ages equipment far faster than it would on the mainland. A genuinely private, well-run island commonly costs $1 to $5 million a year just to keep functioning, before a single dollar of purchase price or construction debt is even factored in. That's the honest cost side. Now here's the honest other half, because this is where the aspiration comes back in, and it's real. A well-positioned private island, built and marketed correctly, can rent for $15,000 to over $200,000 a night, depending on size, exclusivity, and brand. Some of the most famous private islands in the world book out for weddings, milestone birthdays, and corporate retreats at rates that sound almost unbelievable until you realize what's actually being sold. Not a room, but total, uncontested control of an entire piece of the earth for a week. There's no other guest at the pool. There's no other family on the beach. That scarcity is the entire product, and wealthy buyers of that experience pay accordingly. Film and television productions pay even more for the right location, sometimes 6 or 7 figures for a multi-week shoot, precisely because a private island solves a logistical nightmare no ordinary hotel can. Total control over who's in every frame, for as long as filming takes. Corporate retreats for the ultra-wealthy, destination weddings that double as a status statement, and influencer or brand partnership shoots round out a genuinely diversified set of revenue streams that a single beachfront hotel room could never match per square foot. This is the part that makes the whole equation actually work for serious owners. Run a private island as a true hospitality business, booking it out even 60 to 100 nights a year at premium rates, and it's genuinely possible to cover the majority of that $1 to $5 million annual operating cost, sometimes even turn a real profit, especially once the island builds a reputation and a returning client base of the kind of guests who don't ask the price before booking. But that reputation doesn't build itself, and this is a cost most first-time owners badly underestimate. Professional photography and video, the exact kind of drone footage that started this whole story, has to be reshot regularly, in perfect weather, often costing tens of thousands of dollars per session. Luxury travel advisors and high-end booking agents, the gatekeepers who actually control which islands wealthy clients hear about, commonly take a commission of 10 to 20% of the booking value, which sounds steep until you realize they're the reason the phone rings at all. Public relations, a presence at the handful of ultra-luxury travel trade events that matter, and a website built to the same design standard as the villas themselves round out a marketing budget that can easily run into six figures annually before a single night is booked. Skip it, and even the most beautiful island in the world quietly becomes the best kept secret nobody's paying to visit. Here's where the two real strategies split, and both of them work if you're honest with yourself about which one you're actually running. Consider Necker Island, Richard Branson's private island in the British Virgin Islands. For years, it was purely personal, a retreat for Branson and his family and friends, an enormous, glamorous cost center with no expectation of paying for itself. Then it became a business almost by accident. Friends of friends wanted to rent it when the family wasn't there, word spread, and Branson's team realized they were sitting on one of the most bookable pieces of real estate on the planet. Necker now rents for tens of thousands of dollars a night, books, celebrities, executives, and royalty, and generates real revenue that meaningfully offsets its enormous running costs. The lesson buried in that story: an island built first for love, not money, can still become a legitimate business. But only if the owner is willing to eventually let it become one. Now consider a very different bet. Larry Ellison's purchase of 98% of the Hawaiian island of Lanai. This wasn't a private retreat at all. It was closer to buying an entire small economy, complete with existing residents, existing infrastructure, and an existing luxury resort brand already attached to the land. Ellison's strategy wasn't renting out a fantasy escape. It was investing in an island the way you'd invest in a long-term real estate and sustainability project, pouring money into renewable energy, agriculture, and resort renovation with a multi-decade horizon, not a nightly rental spreadsheet. Two completely different owners, two completely different islands, and two completely different definitions of what return on investment even means when the asset is an entire piece of land in the ocean. Both of those stories share the same quiet truth underneath them. An island only makes long-term financial sense once its owner decides, clearly and honestly, what job the island is actually supposed to do. A pure personal retreat needs a deep, patient pool of outside wealth behind it, treated the way you'd treat a yacht or a private jet, an expense, not an investment. A working hospitality asset needs the same discipline, staffing, and marketing as any luxury resort, because guests paying $200,000 for a week expect precisely zero excuses. And here's the scenario that separates islands that survive decades from ones that quietly get sold off after a rough few years. Picture a major hurricane making direct landfall. Docks get torn apart, villas lose roofs. The desalination plant, sitting exposed near the shoreline, gets damaged just when it's needed most for cleanup and rebuilding. Insurance for private islands in hurricane-prone regions is notoriously expensive and sometimes difficult to obtain at all, commonly running into the hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in premiums alone for a well-developed property, and even a comprehensive policy can leave a meaningful gap between what's covered and what it actually costs to rebuild a dock, a villa, and a power system simultaneously. Now, stack a bad booking season on top of that repair bill. A slow year in luxury travel, a recession, a global health scare, bad regional press about safety or weather, and the rental revenue that was supposed to offset a chunk of the operating cost simply doesn't show up, while the fixed costs of staffing, fuel, and insurance keep arriving exactly on schedule regardless. Owners who bought an island assuming steady rental income can find themselves paying full staffing and maintenance costs on a property generating a fraction of its usual revenue for a full year or more before conditions genuinely recover. This is exactly the situation that's forced more than one private island onto the market at a steep discount over the decades, not because the island stopped being beautiful, but because the gap between fixed costs and unpredictable revenue became something the owner could no longer comfortably absorb. So here's the honest, complete picture, pros and cons, both sitting on the same table. The pros are real. A private island is one of the only assets on Earth that sells pure scarcity. There is only one of each one, and no amount of capital can manufacture a second version of the exact island you own. It can be a genuine status asset that appreciates over decades in the right location. It can, if run as a real hospitality business, generate meaningful revenue at margins per guest that almost no other luxury property can match because guests aren't paying for a room, they're paying for an entire world with nobody else in it. And for a family with genuinely deep, patient capital, it can be one of the most privately controlled, most secure retreats money can buy, insulated from the world in a way no gated mainland estate ever fully achieves. The cons are equally real. The ongoing cost, commonly $1 to $5 million a year before financing, doesn't pause for a slow season, a storm, or a global downturn in travel. Every basic utility a mainland homeowner takes for granted has to be built, staffed, and maintained entirely from scratch, aging faster than it would anywhere else because of relentless salt air and humidity. Insurance in the regions where the most desirable islands sit is expensive and sometimes hard to secure at all. And the revenue side, however lucrative in a good year, is genuinely lumpy, dependent on weather, on global travel sentiment, and on the kind of ultra-wealthy clientele who can simply choose to stay home the moment the news gets uncertain. Add it all together, and the real answer to should you own a private island isn't yes or no. It's a question about which owner you actually are. If the island is meant to be a pure personal sanctuary, the honest math says budget it like a very large yacht, expect zero return, and only proceed if the cost genuinely doesn't move the needle on your finances. If the island is meant to be a business, the honest math says it can work, and work well, but only with the same operational seriousness you'd apply to any luxury hospitality brand. Real marketing, real staffing discipline, and a genuine plan for the slow years, not just the good ones. So picture that same island one more time. The turquoise water, the single villa on the shoreline, the drone shot that started this whole story. Except now you're not just looking at paradise. You're looking at a genuinely serious asset with a genuinely serious annual bill attached to it, run by people who either treat it like the most beautiful expense they'll ever choose to carry or turn it into one of the most exclusive hospitality businesses in the world. Both paths are real. Both paths work for the right owner. The only mistake is buying the island and refusing to be honest from day one about which one you actually signed up for. Because an island was never really about escaping the world. It was always about building one, deciding exactly how much that world should cost, and deciding just as deliberately whether that world is ever going to pay you back. The buyers who regret it are almost never the ones who spent too much on the generators or the dock. They're the ones who bought the fantasy in the listing photo and never sat down to ask which of the two doors they were actually walking through. The ones who assumed paradise would simply take care of itself, the way it seems to in every photograph, in every brochure, in every 10-second clip that made them fall in love with the idea in the first place. The buyers who love owning an island for decades are almost always the ones who did the unglamorous math first. They know their annual burn rate to the dollar. They know exactly how many nights they need to book, at exactly what rate, to keep the business side afloat if that's the model they chose. Or they know with total clarity that they never expected the island to pay for itself at all, and budgeted their life around that truth from day one. So the next time a drone shot pans slowly across a private island, the empty beach, the single villa, the water so clear it looks unreal, remember what's actually sitting underneath that frame. A power system somebody has to maintain at 2 in the morning when a generator trips. A staff living far from everything they know, keeping paradise running for people who may never even meet them. A bank account somewhere, quietly financing every single second of that stillness. It's still one of the most extraordinary things money can buy. It's just never as simple as the photograph makes it look. And the owners who last decades are the ones who understood that before they ever signed the deed.